Hello, I'm Molly Smothers, and I am the Associate Regional Minister for the Christian Church in Kentucky, here um, with you today as a part of my congregational renewal part of my job. We asked you about a month ago to send questions that you might have about polity, um, con constitutions, bylaws, and things like that, and we were absolutely thrilled with your response. And I am here today with Josh Crabtree. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. But our hope is that this will answer some of your questions, give you some insight and some ways to move forward. And we're hoping you might watch it with your leadership. It will be embedded on the website for some time, and we hope it is of some help. Josh, tell these people who you are.
Well, good morning. My name's Joshua Crabtree. I am a lawyer, as Molly mentioned, and I am a Disciples of Christ member at Florence Christian Church. I'm a graduate of Transylvania University, and I was,
Yay.
I was called to the Disciples long before I knew what they were. In my little small town, I grew up Southern Baptist, and it was part of an independent Christian church, but kept being drawn this way. And till I walked in one Sunday morning at the corner of Main Street 42 in Florence after I moved here for law school at the University of Cincinnati, and I was shocked because there was a woman pastor and two women elders, and I just what have I gotten myself into? And I have been there ever since. And this is more of an answer than you want, but I'm going to give it anyway. Is that
Go ahead.
I, for the longest time in life, struggled because I thought God had given me no useful gifts for the church. I am not called to do foreign mission work. I made it very clear to me. It's not where I'm called to. There's other areas that I have struggled with. Why can't I just serve in these ways? And I have finally, in the last several years, embraced that God has given me these administrative talents and skills, and I am embracing it in this way. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share those.
Well, one of the things I think is important as we're moving forward is this still is a part of what, as Dr. Gillette calls our kingdom work. It is still important that things be done in such a way that the church functions smoothly and with transparency. And it allows us then, when this is already in place, to move forward and do some other things. So we're going to start with a couple of, I hope they're easy ones. We'll start and we'll just kind of see how they go from here. One of the churches asked, I guess we can start with this, asked if there are any typical kind of rubrics for sabbaticals, for leadership, for lead ministers and full-time staff. Can you address that?
It is a great question, and it's going to be longer than the initial answer, but this is going to apply to all of the rest of the answers too.
Okay, good.
There is this horribly wonderful answer that you get in law school, and it's the appropriate answer that you get from professors when you do this, and it depends. And many of the things I want to answer, many of the answers we're going to get today are an it depends answer for things, and so this answer is going to be an it depends in a way. But I think that oftentimes sabbatical in these terms that we incorporate in church, just like in the secular world, we adopt language from each other that maybe are not exactly what we intend for them to be. And so the question that you have to ask about sabbatical, I think, is really, do you mean for it to be a sabbatical in the academic sense of what it is, or do you really just mean it's extra vacation or time off? And if you're at a church and it's like, we really just want to give the minister after a period of time some more time off, then just don't call it a sabbatical. Give them more time off. If it is a question about really the purpose of sabbatical, a time to kind of separate and go and do some further academic pursuits or study something, and you bring that knowledge and back to the congregation to share it, a way to enhance your ministry, then it needs to be more structured than if it's just extra time. So really, if it's just you've been here so long, you need a little bit longer break, give them extra leave, a leave of absence, paid leave of absence, whatever it wants to be. But if you really intend for it to be a sabbatical, like we've adopted in the academic world, it's usually every seventh year you get a 6 months off or a semester off.
Mhm.
Is how it would
Mhm.
work. I don't know if congregations can handle a semester off of time for it. Our particular congregation does usually, I think, after 3.5 years, you get it's 3 months off. That's kind of how that
Mhm.
breaks up. So I really think if you had to think of what the needs of your congregation and the purpose of it is, but what I would say is if it's going to be a true sabbatical, and you don't want to run into any employment law issues that could pop up, is set up in the beginning what that process is going to be.
Mhm.
Says I'm going to go on sabbatical. It's approved by the board and the elders. There's a committee of people that they are accountable to as to what their study and purpose is going to be and how they're going to share that back. And they tell what their plan is. And if it's really going to be a sabbatical, then they also lay out what the product that they're going to bring back is.
Right. Right.
And so if you think about those things, everybody's on the right terms and knows what it's going to be from the beginning. So think of it that way. So is there a real rubric or answer? No, it's what fits your congregational needs and really what the purpose of the sabbatical is.
I think when I was at my last church as a lead minister, it was in a college town, and so they kind of understood the term. And one of them was my husband and I went to Ireland for a month, but we came back with me having learned a whole lot more about Celtic philosophy, and I was pastoring in Eastern Kentucky, and they really informed one another, and the congregation said anyway that they benefited from that because I was able to come back not only rested but with a whole new way of looking at sermons and studying scripture and things like that. So it can actually be enhancing. And I will not throw this in as a commercial, but we do have grants available for certain churches that if a minister is going to be gone for a couple of months, there are grants that you can apply for that will also perhaps help the congregation hire someone to be there during that. So thank you. It depends. It's a perfectly good answer.
Well, I'll tell you where I first encountered this as a legal issue for a congregation years ago was there was some ministerial changes going on, and they asked one of the ministers to not take their sabbatical at the time that it was scheduled because they had other changes and needed them to stay on for a while. Well, that minister also decided to leave, and in that process said, "Well, I want my sabbatical paid out to me." And there was really the question was this extra vacation that they were entitled to, because it's like, well, if it's sabbatical, you're not coming back. You're not bringing something back. You're not going
not presenting anything. Sure. Yeah.
So how are we going to address that? And it was like, so you really do. So your excellent question that you're thinking about it, but know that that's really has to be intentional as to what the purpose of it is. And so if it was extra vacation, they probably need to pay that out to somebody. If it was not extra vacation, but truly a sabbatical, then that you have to deal with that in a different way.
Then that was left at the doorway when they left. Yeah.
Contractually entitled to that. So it was how
right.
It was resolved.
Right. Right. That's important to know ahead of time. That makes sense. Here's another one that we got from more than a few churches. If you can give us some suggestions on how to update or adapt constitutional or bylaw situations for meeting times to include Zoom options or digital options so that meetings don't necessarily always have to be face-to-face in the building. It depends, right?
Yeah, well, it's another great question, but it depends. And so what we're going to look at is, what does your Constitution say about meetings? Okay, so this will probably come up throughout constitutions. Constitutions and bylaws are different.
This is a good time to bring this up. Yes.
And it depends on what the Constitution or bylaws say about making amendments about meeting time. Now, if your Constitution says we are going to meet X number of times, once a month or whatever it's going to be. I grew up in a little small church, so the first Wednesday of every month was the business meeting of the church.
Right.
And the Constitution said that. Well, to change that, to add digital options for that, you would need to amend your constitution and go through whatever the amendment process in the constitution says. I'm going to suggest that your constitution not lay out so many things. If you have the constitution, you might say the constitution says we're going to have a congregational meeting once a year annually. Okay. And then as many other meetings as might be necessary as established by our bylaws. Bylaws can say we're going to meet 4 times a year, or we're going to meet once a month, and what the means of that meeting will be. So whether it's going to be an electronic meeting, or so many percentages of those could be electronic, or we can have 3 meetings electronically a year, but not back to back, or however you want to phrase it. But to answer the question, you definitely should have a provision there. We learned that during the pandemic, and my particular congregation had to amend our constitution with a parking lot vote of people going into amended, and our process was very involved about how you made an amendment to the constitution. It had to be read to the congregation 3 Sundays prior, or each Sunday prior to what that is, and then we had to vote on it and what all the requirements were to say we can be, via Zoom or whatever that would be. So it's possible to be done, but the manner in which you do it is going to depend on your constitution or your bylaws. So take a look at those.
Okay. But I feel like someone's going to ask this, so I'll play not devil's advocate, but I'll ask with a follow-up. Legally, a digital vote can count as much as an in-person vote, correct? As long as things are in place.
Yes, as long as you have the right documents in place for it, and they're taking minutes the same way and recording those votes, however you would normally report your votes, as long as it doesn't matter if it's virtual or if it's electronic via email, if it's in person, it requires the same minutes and same record keeping and things about that, but the votes are the same.
Good.
As long as the constitution or bylaws allow for it.
Okay. Yay. Okay, we're zooming through this. This feels pretty good. Our next question, and this is really not necessarily anything you really need to answer, except we just need to let it be known. A lot of people wanted to make sure that we can have like a model constitution or bylaw that we could add via link. We can have that, can't we? And attach that in the website, right?
Sure. It depends on what model you want. But yes, there are some that are available. I have this secret mission of mine to rewrite constitutions but it's in line with the Josh Crabtree model of what a constitution should read like in church operations go, and not what might work for your particular congregation. So that's the real thing. You get this answer a lot is your people, and
Sure.
People have a way of operating, and so let's do the most simple version of what is needed to accomplish what your goals are. Let's not overcomplicate things. It's kind of like I'm a King James version kind of person. I just like the way that it reads, but it sounds sometimes when you're reading it, but the message is a lot simpler. And says your way. So let's, it's what's going to make the most sense for you to operate in. And so think about that way. And so models are hard because if I give you a model for a large congregation that has multiple ministries that are going on and doing lots of different things, the rules might be more complicated than what you need, because that's not the space that you're in, what you're doing. So models are hard. You don't have to have all of those provisions.
Right. And to a certain extent, what may have been completely appropriate in 1965 is not necessarily appropriate in 2023 as we are recording this. And I feel like I have to say this as a pastor, it's not good or bad, it's just different. Right. So, okay. We will have those up, and we may have 2 or 3 different models. And of course, now that it's not secret anymore, your secret mission, if you've got one, we can put it up and people can do with it what they need to. How about that?
I don't have anybody that's ever agreed to my version of one, but
Oh,
I,
well, who knows?
that's right. And I'll answer this why I say it that way. Because I have a belief, and maybe it's true or not, but that most people like to be involved in ministry with the church. They like to be involved in some way of different ministries that you have, and not necessarily in the business end of things. And, so I try to simplify that structure down to make it the business operations things geared to people with that particular skill set, and let them handle kind of some business and other things where that allows the focus of other people to be involved in ministries that they're really called to. But some of these church boards will have 30, 40, 50 people and trying to make decisions, and that's really hard to do.
It is absolutely even just to come to consensus, much less. Yeah, we will have things available. Okay, we had several questions about and this is kind of interesting to me, but it several people did ask about this, about elder tenures. There are some churches who, when you are an elder, you're an elder for life, and I think a lot of disciples understand it that way. But where it comes into play is perhaps how that functions, as to whether you get a sabbatical year off, and I use that word again, but you're like 3 years on, 1 year off. So can you give us, does it depend, Josh? I bet it does.
Absolutely, it absolutely depends. But I have a preference in this way too. I believe this is Josh Crabtree theology.
Okay.
If you are ordained elders, I don't think you lose that ordination in yourself, right? You've done it, you're an elder for life. Okay, but how long are you going to serve? Right. That's the question, what the tenure of that's going to be. In my congregation, you are ordained an elder. You're an elder for life, and that usually accompanies a term on the board, a 3-year term on the board, and you can't serve in that role. You have to take a year off for that for a time. So there's always going to be a break in between. You don't stop being an elder. You still go to elders meetings. You still perform the ministry role of an elder, but you are not actively serving in a church or office during that time. That's just how ours is set. So I think that there should always be a way for elders to step away from active service when they need to do that for a period of time, different seasons of life. But for me right now, most of my attention and ministry that way is towards the region as opposed to my individual congregation. But I'm also an elder at Florence Christian Church, so it's kind of how you balance those things out. And for this season of my life, they're giving me less duties there elsewhere. So, but so the answer to the question is, I think that the ordination is for life, but that doesn't always coincide with an active board role or some other position in the church.
I've always found if you don't give people a chance to say not now, you never give them a chance to say yes. Everything deserves a balance, and there's a kind of a biblical idea of rest and work, and I think that applies almost in every position. We kind of started off talking about sabbaticals or vacations or something. I think that applies straight down the line. Okay, we're going to move on to, these are all pertinent questions, but these particular questions have more to do with moving forward, if you will, into kind of the 21st century. A lot of churches have sets of committees that at one time absolutely served a function, although I'm in my late 60s, and I think when I was little, I remember thinking, Jiminy, there are a lot of committees. But several churches ask that you give us some kind of an idea of what would be important or essential committees, especially for churches who may be a little top heavy in that department and are looking to streamline without losing function.
Great question. The first question was, what if your constitution says that you have to have all of these certain committees,
Right.
well, that's what you're stuck with, right? Functional or not, those are what you have. So I again would recommend that you don't put too many committees in your constitution. I kind of like in the constitution saying that we will have a stewardship committee and as many, and then something to deal with ministry and personnel kind of a committee, and then as many other committees as necessary, you know, as established by the board. So then you're not set that you have to have X
Bound.
So your churches are always going to deal with money in some way, and they're always going to have to deal with personnel in a sense. You're going to have a pastor at least in some role. So if you have those two committees set up, the rest of them, then the board could establish what meets the needs of your congregation at a given time. So, but I think that you know, I can't tell you the right number of the right number of committees that you need, other than to say you probably need a committee to deal with money, a committee to deal with ministry and programs of a sort, and however many of those that you need, or subcommittees off of that one that might be necessary, and you need something to deal with personnel. Otherwise, I'm not exactly sure what you may need, but you could have perfectly legitimate reasons. Oh, well, I forgot another big one that you probably need to have too, which is your building committee. And
I was just going to say property is kind of essential, but
essential
yeah,
to have it in there. I don't know how to fix anything. I don't know how to do it. I have no skills in that way, although I'm chairing the building committee right now. And so it's just, but it's a different function than our property committee, but something to deal with your actual physical building central too. So if you really have those groups in place, I think that you're covering what's needed. And then like if you're amending your constitution or to get rid of some committees or change something, you know, that's the ideal time to say, and as many other committees as the board, you know, needs to establish to do the functions of the church. You know, maybe you've always had a Halloween of some sort, a trunk or treat, and then your constitution says you have a trunk or treat committee, and then you decide to do away with it, and you have a committee that's you're technically out of compliance, but you're not meeting regularly as a committee to talk about trunk or treats. You know.
And here again, you're pointing up that the Constitution kind of needs to be, this is a bad analogy, but kind of the skeleton. And then it's the bylaws where it can be a little more flexible and can be more easily adaptable.
And for the bylaws, you can even go further and say we have our Constitution. That is, maybe this question comes up, but the Constitution, that's the document. That's the one that you are going to follow. That's essential to your being as a congregation. The things that are most important to you to put in. The bylaws are more operational. There's certain things that you're going to put in that Constitution. It's like these things absolutely happen no matter what. You know, these are the things that are important to us and that we need to essentially function. And then your bylaws put more meat on that skeleton that you talk about. This is ways that we can operate. That can be changed more regularly. It might be we're going to have an audit, but you're going to change when the audit's going to be, or those kinds of things are just set up in your bylaws to talk about how do we really govern our day-to-day operational kind of features. And then you even just have your own, you know, procedures in at that point. This is our procedure for counting money. So the procedure of how we're going to count the money and you're going to document that doesn't need to be in the bylaws, doesn't need to be in the Constitution, but it's like right now this is the best practice for doing that because probably when you wrote the Constitution, depending on that there was an electronic given. The congregations accept money electronically. Now, I don't know how you count that, you know, and how you do it, but somebody's doing it, I assume. And so you would probably have procedures for how that happens. And
right. Yeah. And it's so funny you should say that. I need for the people who are watching to know that Josh and I didn't plan that, but what a lovely segue to the next question, which is any help in guiding congregations into moving to a digital form of giving. And from the way a lot of those questions read, it did have to do with whether that needs to be addressed in bylaws? And you kind of sort of answered that, but
I absolutely think that you need to have in your governance document how you are accounting for that money.
Mhm.
There are not a lot of requirements for churches for with the IRS, for example, with
Mhm.
501c3 status. The charitable status as a church, as a 501c3 entity, is given with the IRS. They just recognize you as being a tax exempt organization by being a church. This is being a way too complicated answer, but I'm going to go this way for a minute.
That's okay. That's okay.
And so the IRS defines things very differently here than what we do, can do differently than what we do at church. For example, church and ministry by the IRS are defined as two very different things. And so there's about 14 things that a church has to have certain elements of that the IRS looks at it to say that they count as a church.
Really?
Yeah. And so
Okay.
you have to legally exist. You have to have, right? So you some sort of document. You have a recognized form of worship. You meet regularly. You have that regular services count. You have some sort of literature of your own, the Bible being one, but then you want other documents that you might have as far as doing that. You have some organization of ordained ministry is a factor that they have. You have some sort of formal code or doctrine as to what you are. You have some sort of ecclesiastical government. This is how we operate as a church. You have Sunday school counts. You don't have to have all of these factors, but there's 14 of them.
An educational component of some kind.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
So you have those. So those things qualify as a church. You don't have to have all of them. Ministries are not counted. They don't get the automatic status that a church does. So if you are not if it's not a church that you're creating, but you have a ministry of some purpose, you'll have to think of a good example, Molly, but like the Walk to Emmaus.
There you go. Yeah.
Somebody, but that's a separate ministry. They have to apply for 501c3 status.
Right.
They have other rules and filings that are required, but churches are automatic in that status.
And those are in place so that I cannot start a church here in my living room on my own in order to get tax exempt status. Right. There has to be.
John Oliver has a wonderful thing on HBO. It's a bit unorthodox, but it's critical of some of the television kind of ministries that exist out in certain places. Shows you how easy it is to qualify for some church creation. But yes, the idea is it wouldn't just be allowed for you individually, Molly, saying, I don't want to pay taxes. So I'm just going to create.
This is my belief. This is my belief system. I don't want to pay
taxes and do that. So right. So it's to protect you against this. But the rule that applies for everybody is that you do have to have the record keeping. You have to track your money that comes in. Churches don't report that to the IRS. Ministries do. Churches don't, unless you have 501c3 status on your own. And we can talk about maybe at some point why that would be necessary.
We will.
But as a particular church, you don't have to report that information to the IRS, but you need to be tracking that. And there are times that you may be called upon to provide that information. So online giving, you definitely have to have some way set up to be able to answer the questions about how that money's coming in, and that you have internal controls in place to make sure that the person who just takes the electronic money isn't just putting it in their pocket. I'm not saying that anybody's going to do that, but the idea is whatever checks and balances kind of have on who counts the cash that comes in the church, somebody also monitoring the process for the electronic bill. So set something up. It doesn't have to be the same process that you use for counting cash, but it should be similar in the idea of control. So you want multiple eyes looking at it. You want somebody reconciling the books. You want to be able to check the account and know that it's doing it that way. And
But that also protects the people who are entrusted with that. It gives them some protection. And I speak as a pastor because it's what I am. That's also a stewardship. To be responsible for the offerings is a stewardship issue as well as a legal issue.
But before this earlier phase of my life, I ran a nonprofit organization and was really good with how do we receive text gifts, because everybody was telling me, oh, this Generation Z and this younger group or whatever generation we're on now that I'm past now. But it's like, okay, it's how do you receive? They want to text their gifts to church because they're emotionally at this moment, they're spiritually emotionally led to give. So they
in this moment,
moment do it in text. Well, I will tell you the best answer for you there is probably use a service. Find the one that meets the needs of your congregation. There's plenty online that have lots of controls. Yes, there's fees and things involved, but they'll talk with you about what those are going to be. But like the text giving and those things, the electronic giving is probably set up through the bank. That one probably has a lot of
right.
But like the text to give, you probably need to look at a few services that there's plenty out there.
And I'm going to add a clarifying question because I can already hear somebody saying that. So text giving would be something like Venmo or
even text to give, which you say text this number.
Text, okay.
And how much money you want to put in. And
right.
It's linked. You can link it to your bank account or however that's set up for the particular thing. I don't tend to text to give, so I don't know the exact feature. But Venmo is definitely one of them. Zelle, or one thing I pay oftentimes. So, but use one of those things and put a process in place to protect everybody involved in what that's going to be.
And the minister and me would also like for congregations to have the leadership go ahead and address something out loud that people might talk about in the parking lot, which is, and I cannot tell you how many times I've heard it, Josh, I don't want to give electronically because when the basket's passed and people don't see me put money in, they think I'm not giving. And so it's also helpful for leadership from time to time to say, we're getting ready to pass the offering, but I know many of you gave at 2 o'clock this morning while you were asleep or whatever, just acknowledge it.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think that the real governance of church happens in the parking lot.
Absolutely. Totally.
But the second part is that I switched to giving electronically. Instead of weekly, I can give once a month, and it's what the church. I think it helps them the way they kind of like things, but I get what people are feeling because I feel the same thing. Now we have gone to a point. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't like change. The hill I'm going to die on in life is pews. My church laughs at me all the time about that because I'm a proponent of pews. But we don't pass the plate. So we make the call to give, and we talk about the various ways that you can give and opportunities to serve in church that week are coming ahead. But we just have some boxes in the front and back that people can place money in as they leave.
I can hear a lot of people already saying, yes, I'm going to be able to quote Josh Crabtree as saying we need to do away with that. And then there are probably some people right now hitting their knees and praying for your soul.
Oh yeah, because I want the plate. I tell you that was what I was not comfortable with. I like, this is the way we always did it, and that's the way I wanted to
always did it.
That's
absolutely
right. I'm one of those
absolutely
people, but I got
that is so well. Everyone who is watching this has a different and they're walking back to our screen right now and telling us their side of the story. So that is genuinely funny. Going on with this kind of 21st century thing. This is and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure which generation we're on, but I know I'm a baby boomer and God save my soul. But there are more than a few congregations who now have people who are attending regularly, who show up for the showdown, as I'm fond of saying. They give, they give of their time, they give of their talents, but are uncomfortable with the concept of membership. And in fact, there are other church, no, don't, let me finish my sentence before you laugh at me. There are other churches that are kind of doing away with that concept, and yet trying to balance this. There is a need to have some kind of wording in place so that, let's just say, there is a vote on something that's a little controversial, and I come in bringing 17 people that I know off the street to vote on that given, so we have to strike a balance. And so there are a lot of people wondering, for you to tell them wording or phrasing or understanding as to how to move forward with that in the future. Ta-da.
I love these questions, and it's because I made this commitment when I was the board chair. I had certain things I wanted to accomplish. That these were the things I felt called congregationally to do during my tenure as a chair during that 3 years, and I was going to make these things happen, and people would come to me that would be opposed to that, and because I know I'm going to outmaneuver them on the rules, so kind of thing. But I always said to them, like, listen, yes, I'm doing this procedurally in a way, but if you want to know the way to get around me, here's how you do it. So I'm going to be very transparent and tell you the ways that what the answers are, whether I agree with them or not. So
there you go. Okay.
So this same answer for this question. I have no issues with membership. I'm a member. I have membership. I've been a member of a couple churches in my life, but that's where I've lived and things, and it does not bother me in the same sense. But I get that it does with some people. And you're right, you're really striking a balance, because what we're asking is who has a role in governance of the church and decisions that are being made. And my particular congregation has done away with the term membership. They use ministry partners is what they call it. You become a ministry partner of the church formally. It's semantics because it means the same thing, but that for some groups that satisfies their needs and their concerns with membership. I don't have a problem with membership. But really, that's a really good question, because I have actually know of situations where a particular church had a large group that was kind of using their location as a site to conduct ministry for their church. They were having a church plant essentially that was using a facility there, and their numbers just grew to a certain thing, and they just took everything over at a business thing, because that was how it was set up, and there wasn't a clearly defined way of what the governance was, and
wow,
and members could be. And churches have assets. You have a building probably, and you have the stuff that goes along with that, if nothing else. I mean, those things. Who's responsible, and how are those things going to be used? The requirements that the loosest requirements that I have seen tend to be, which is you have attended church within the last year, you have contributed in some way, financially, that's given you, or you've volunteered, you served in ministry in some capacity, and doing that. That's probably the loosest kind of definition.
Right.
Then we have the question of, well, we have all these people that go to Florida now that are a certain age, and they're staying in Florida, but they send their contribution in regularly. And they are opposed to these changes taking place, so they want to vote electronically now or remotely against certain things, but they're not actively involved in the day-to-day operations of the church. There's a lot of things with it. So you should have, I think, that to protect everybody involved, there should be some kind of parameters for who gets to participate in governance, and that is limited to the people that are formal partners or members of your congregation, be whatever you want to call it. I think the first step is explaining to people why it's important, that why there is such thing as membership or a formal joining of a church, and what that means and entails with it. I have use the phrase. I've heard this my whole life from different people with different things, and as I've gotten older and more set in my ways, I think it's true. And they'll say, I'm a member of this church, good or bad, with whatever's going on. I don't leave when something doesn't suit me, or the minister says something I don't like, or this happens in a certain way. This is where I belong, and and that's where I'm going to be, and I'm there for the long haul kind of thing.
Mhm.
There is some idea of joining with a group in that way. What the parameters are is something that you as a congregation will need to kind of wrestle with, is saying, what do we say counts as somebody being a person that gets to be involved in our governance.
I like the wording though, ministry partner, because as you say, in one sense it's semantics, and yet those of us who are in this particular faith understanding know that words create and words have power. And in a very real way, it would seem to me, if I'm a partner with someone, that actually in an odd way has more weight perhaps than simply being a member.
And
You know,
I
it infers joining more than just in name only.
it's a mutually beneficial relationship that's happening.
There you go.
That's different than just being a member of a club. It's in a sense, it's I am partnering with you to our mutual benefit.
And we like to use the phrase covenant, around here. And I do understand that, because I have heard stories, and I'm sure you have too, horror stories like you just mentioned. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Those kinds of things can happen on a smaller scale, even in a small church, but with a very long standing effect that can really do damage to people. And it is a protection in some.
And I'm going to use the term ministerial function, and not in the sense of being a minister. It's more of the administrative function. Ministerial in legal terms means what's administrative function. Is somebody needs to know who's allowed to vote.
So, it's the truth.
So your church clerk is going to need to keep some sort of role as to who is eligible to participate in decision making and those things that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
We need to have a record. So who's allowed to be that at some point also needs to take place. And so whether or not you require, a public affirmation of faith and desire to become part of that ministry is something that you as a congregation will need to wrestle with. I don't know what that you will need to think and ask those questions. But legally, I would say have something, know what your process is, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to keep track of what that is and who's allowed to participate.
What I'm hearing from this discussion, and I think it's probably beneficial to everyone who's listening, is that it's really important not only for us to look at these documents or these procedures, but also to articulate them from time to time. Part of my function as a regional minister, from time to time, I'll go to people's churches and they'll say, we love visitors. And I say, your service doesn't show it. Whether you use a printed bulletin or a screen, when, let's just say, the offering's brought forward and everyone stands up and starts singing and a visitor goes, what are we doing? You're letting them know there's a secret password or a handshake and no one knows it. And so that idea of this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it is important, but it's also important for members to hear that from time to time, from occasionally from the pulpit or in a board meeting, for someone to say, this is why we're doing this, just to have it out there.
I don't miss church, so I find wherever I happen to be, we'll find some place to go.
Right.
I can't say that I don't on occasion. I have children now. My life has changed, but before and as I have visited places where they go out of their way to stick a big flower on me and hand me something, and are wonderfully loving, and I appreciate their kindness. And I was like, please don't call me. I don't admit that I'm a visitor because I don't want that kind of thing. And others where it's like, I'm comfortable in church, but I have no clue what's going on right now, and this is making me unwelcome.
Right.
but everybody finds the way that can work that's best for your community.
It's just sometimes important to remember that, you know, the old adage, never say always and never say never. But we were somewhere not too terribly long ago, and instead of the doxology, they sang a little hymn that is in the child's hymnal, "We give thee but thine own." But when I said something about, I would have liked to have known that ahead of time, and they just kind of looked at me like, everyone knows that. And I didn't press the point because it wasn't the time or the place, but most of the time, everyone doesn't know everything all the time. And it depends on how you work that. You were talking about, I think, some kind of important things. This may be a nuance, and yet I do think it's important, and it has come up. Churches, some churches have a contract for a minister. Some churches use a letter of call. Some churches say, we want you to stay here as long as you can, and we'll, some churches do it on a year-to-year basis, and they're wanting your wisdom. Josh, give it to us, won't you?
So I evaluate it in two ways. One is that as lawyers, we're risk averse. We don't want you to have problems.
Sure.
And so I've tried to avoid the problems that you're going to have, but also what makes the most sense. So if I was arguing it on either side, so your letter of call, I'm going to argue as a contract. Whether it's a contract, I'm going to argue that these are the terms are. It's going to be the same. I'm going to treat them the same. So
okay.
I don't believe that you have to have one or the other, but you have to have one.
Okay, this is good. Good first step.
So have something that, like the terms that you have called somebody to, and now it could be the formal call of someone is most likely needs to be memorialized in your board minutes or your congregational meeting minutes. I believe that most churches that I'm aware of, it's typically a congregational role in calling.
Yeah, affirmation.
And so that's recorded in some way. And while it may make people uncomfortable to talk about money and some of those things, you're approving contract terms or sense or the length of the term or whatever those may be are things that the congregation probably needs to affirm or vote on if they are, depending on what your constitution says. And maybe it just says there's a pulpit committee and they handle all of the terms and nobody knows what the terms are. Well, somebody's got to write checks at some point to pay people and to make sure that we're providing, we're meeting the terms of whatever that contract is with the person you called it to be. So those things should be widely available, I think. Transparency in that sense of how those things go. Don't let me forget to talk about an IRS minister salary question here in a moment. But
oh, good. Well, we're going to head into the IRS in just a minute, so I'm going to write that down.
But so whatever you use, have something and lay out what those terms are going to be. It may be that you want to say what an initial term is. I haven't often seen that where somebody is called and says you're called for a 3-year term that's automatically renewable if we don't give notice, or it's you're called for 3 years and we're looking at this. I don't see that often. Where I see that in other fields, it's usually an open-ended kind of. You're called to be the minister. Here you might see more of the other side of the one.
Actually, there are several churches that do a yearly kind of a renewal. They see it in part as almost like a vow renewal, if you know what I'm saying. But that is also in their legal documents the time where if they're going to give an additional week of vacation, or they're going to give a raise or something like that, that's all wrapped into that. And so there's a time and a place, and everyone knows we renew every July 1st or whatever.
The ministers or pastors probably won't like this part of the answer to work, but I think that there should be a regular time built into whatever your process procedure, maybe probably annually, to kind of do an evaluation.
An evaluation, absolutely.
And if that's the elder's job to be, usually most people aren't going to be surprised by this kind of thing, right? We have a formal evaluation process that we use, that I have been part of. And there's others where we didn't have an evaluation process. The same congregation just thought it was necessary to get that feedback, but it kind of lets everybody know where things are kind of standing. And now I have this feeling that most ministers probably hear at the end of church on Sunday, something they like or don't like often, kind of.
Yeah.
But you get an overall sense of it, and it gives you a time frame to know that it's going to happen in a formal way. So maybe that's why they do that annual renewal or whatever kind of planning. But I think you can accomplish that with an evaluation. You can accomplish that with the contract terms.
Right. I think I most of the churches where I've been senior minister, I have had an annual evaluation along with all the other staff. And part of that was always explained to me very kindly as saying everyone can use constructive criticism. And I never felt that it was punitive or anything like that. But it is important for ministers to have that same thing. It's negative and positive feedback, and I don't even mean negative. It's constructive criticism, or we are really pleased with this. It's just always kind of nice to have that done. Moving on, this is an interesting one, but we were talking about different churches doing things different ways. There was a question brought up about perhaps adding a stipulation in the Constitution or in the bylaws. Now that I'm listening to you, I'm thinking maybe more in the Constitution, because it seems to me it's important enough to be kind of written there. For an occasion where a congregation is thinking about leaving the denomination. Now, we don't want anyone to leave our denomination, and we want to continue adding, and we want to be in fellowship and all of that good stuff. So I'm not necessarily bringing this up, but there have been occasions, let's just say in another denomination, because it would never happen in ours. So let's just talk about another denomination where, and especially in light of what the Methodist Church has been going through and things like this, it's very timely. But there actually have been occasions where the minister and perhaps just a small coterie of leadership get up on Sunday and say, we used to belong to the Crabtree denomination, but we're not there anymore. And the congregation gets no feedback or no any kind of input on that. And so there was a question about, should there be something in place for a process like that? And this is kind of a little delicate, but it's probably important to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going, first of all, most often when churches are formed, you're going to get a procedural and a substantive answer for things. Most of the time when churches are formed, you're most likely going to need to get an EIN number.
Yes.
So that you can put your money, open up a bank account at some bank for your church to handle house and pay bills and write checks and take in money, right? So you're going to have to do one of those things. But before you can get an EIN number, you have to have articles of incorporation with the state.
Okay.
And to get those, now let me just say that this is the rule for a long time. If your church is set up more than a couple hundred years ago, maybe you don't have this and you still somehow existed before these things that happened. But I'm pretty certain you had to get an EIN number at some point. You have articles of incorporation before you can get an EIN number. And that just says that your legal existence is your articles of incorporation. And in that, it tells, there's a line that you have to fill out what the purpose is that you're going to be. And you say that we are going to be a church as part of the disciples of Christ, and you put that in there. And if you want to change that, that is called an organic change to your existence. And so there has to be, so then we have to look back. So let's say I'm putting in a scenario right now if your Constitution doesn't deal with it. And so if you want to make that organic change legally to change your corporate status as a church in that sense, it's going to require a unanimous vote of your governing body in Kentucky or a majority vote of your congregation to make that change. So it should not be set up that just a few in leadership can make that change and move denominations for things. Now, this is where you're going to have to help me on some of the disciples things, but I believe that Disciples of Christ, my understanding is that we are a congregationally led denomination, and the ownership of property and things are owned by the congregation. It's not owned by, if you are a Presbyterian, the presbytery owns the property, not the congregation that you live with. So we use different rules in the way that those things work. So really, it's if you're moving all of your assets and property in a sense from Disciples of Christ to somebody else or to become independent, is what you're saying they would do. You probably
ostensibly, we're talking theoretically here.
You probably don't have the same issues to contend with that the Methodists or like the Presbyterians might be dealing with. Something. But you still have to have a process for doing it. So that was kind of the process that said, if you don't have this in your constitution, you don't have this in the bylaws, this is what makes that change happen.
Okay.
What I would suggest to think that the way that you do it is put it in is to address the question before it ever becomes an issue.
There you go.
So your constitution or your bylaws should say, if we ever decide for whatever reason that we want to leave the Disciples of Christ denomination, it will require a 2/3 vote of our congregation, and notice is going to be given this way, and this is going to happen. It's going to be a congregational vote, and it's going to happen on such and such dates. You may even say, essentially, before we even get to the step of leaving, we have this reconciliation process that we want to go through first. We're going to let the denomination know what our issue is, and we're going to try to resolve whatever concerns that we have, in these ways. And if these can't be resolved, then we're going to take this step and do it. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but it's really is think about the potential issue before it ever happens and what process you
right. Right.
Instead of trying the back end to just figure out how we're going to do this. And
this is something you can't grandfather. There you go. It's kind of like writing your will when you're healthy, right?
Right. It's think about this before. Did I answer that in some way that's helpful? I could go on.
No, I think it's really kind of interesting because there are legal aspects to that, and although it may not necessarily include buildings or something like that, there is a process to become, and then there needs to be a process to unbecome. And that's not a really good word, but you know what I'm saying. Whatever is taken to become something, there needs to be a process.
I don't know the answer to this, and I really think it probably should be dealt with at the really it's kind of at the General Assembly, is where they say this is the steps to become a member for a church.
Yeah, right.
And this is the process to leave.
And there probably is, but you bring up a very good point, because some churches, of course, Disciples of Christ as an entity, or we're talking late 60s, early 70s of the last century, so it's not like, but a lot of these churches, I pastored a church. It was a New Light Presbyterian church, and then it was a Christian church, and then it was a Disciples church, so their articles of incorporation and things like that would look very different from a new church start or something like that. And so that bears looking at as well. Yeah,
because you may be in a situation where there is a process that the General Assembly says that you have, if you want to leave, this is the steps that you take. And legally, if you had somebody that wanted to fight or oppose your leaving of the denomination legally, they could say, this is what we've agreed to in terms set by
right. But I think your point is well received. That's received wisdom, that this needs to be thought about and talked about. and hope that it never happens, but it's in place. It's the same reason you get a fire extinguisher or a smoke alarm. You hope and pray you never have to use it, but it's there. I'm aware of time, but I also know there's one thing that we really do need to talk about, and it's pretty important. And that is what you were referencing earlier about ministry and churches, the difference in those legally and our dealings as responsible congregations with the Secretary of State, the IRS. Can you do that in 20 words or less?
20 minutes or less, maybe.
Okay, good. Okay.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So while churches do not have, churches have this automatic tax exemption that exists with the IRS. If you meet, and they don't even say you have to meet like 7 of these 14. It's just like you have to have characteristics of of these 14 steps you have in your church. This is assuming you have no other documentation, formal documentation. You're going to be treated as tax exempt. Now, you would then apply to or tell the state churches don't pay taxes, on sales tax, or purchasing things. Just you kind of have that automatic status. You just need to be.
And that's where that EIN number comes in as well, right?
Mm-hmm. So then here, let's change and say that you want to formally receive your own, and you want to have a formal documentation that says that you're a 501c3 entity. So that you're a recognized charity and tax exempt organ. Well, you're a recognized charity. The IRS recognizes you as a charity. You then take that recognition from the IRS to your state finance people. In Kentucky, it would be the Department of Finance, the Finance Cabinet, and then you would get your tax exempt letter from them. So,
okay, say it again. What is it?
The IRS says that you're a charity, and then you get your tax exempt letter from the IRS and from the state. You're going to go to the state and say, we want to be recognized as a state.
Would that be the Secretary of State's office? What office?
That would be the state finance cabinet. The
state finance. Okay. I'm just clarifying that for me, but also for other people. Okay.
So one of them says, yes, the IRS says that you're a legitimate charity. And the finance cabinet says, here's your tax exempt status.
Okay.
And this requires you to do some filings with the Secretary of State and with the IRS annually. And so you're going to have that EIN number, you're going to have those things, but you're going to file a 990 each year with the IRS. That 990, depending on the amount of money that the congregation brings in. If you're a very small congregation and you don't bring in much revenue or gifts, then you fill out a postcard and you check the box. There's other forms that are a little bit more involved than that for churches. It's not the same as other charitable organizations that have to fill out much more involved 990s.
Can you give me a rough, just a ballpark number of what that money might look like or not?
It's like 20,000 or less or something.
Okay.
It's probably a little bit more than that now, but I don't know the exact number. So once you have that, you have, but I want to back up even more, but you want to get that formal recognition from the IRS. So you're going to have to be formally established in the state. So you're going to have a registered agent. That's the person that's going to say that they're going to be the one responsible for your paperwork each year and receive the notices from the state. There's a form that you fill out at the Secretary of State's website. So you fill out your articles of incorporation, you fill out who your registered agent is. And let me just say this: find a lawyer to do this. If you're doing this, it would make it much easier. So you get your articles of incorporation, you get your agent, your registered agent filed. Then you're going to go get your EIN number, and you're going to go to the bank and open up your bank account. You've got those things, and then you start bringing money. You have to have that record keeping in place now, because we're going to report this information to the IRS, even on a simplified form. And even if you're not going to go get formal 501c3 recognition, you're still required to track what people's giving is, so that you can give them that letter that they said this was your giving of the year for tax purposes that you members of your congregation get. No matter what size you are and how that works, you're required to supply that annually to the members of the congregation.
A lot of times along with the statement that says that you received no, and I think when I've done it with churches, no tangible, because obviously giving is intangible when you're doing it as an offering, but that they receive no tangible, I don't remember the exact legal terminology. Yeah, yeah.
So now, but you want to go get that formal 501c3 status, and here's the question: is why do you want to go get it? Right?
Okay. Yes.
There are reasons why you can go get that. Okay. One is it's kind of a confidence boost. If you're a newer church, you want to show you're legitimate. You know, you can say, "Hey, we've got 501c3 status. We're doing things the right way." You can feel comfortable and confident giving money to us as your church, that we're not just, it's not the church of Molly Smothers' living room where she just wants money and be tax exempt, right? Like we talked about earlier. Then there's financial transparency. It says we are supplying documentation to the IRS, so you know that we're using the money in the right way that you're giving it to us. But it opens up a lot of benefits for you to do that formal status. And so as a church, like I said, the 501c3 status is optional. You don't have to do it. You're automatically recognized as a 501c3 for practical sense of being a charitable organization that can take money in and operate as a church, but it doesn't open up your ability to apply for grants. You know, at Florence Christian Church, we have a shower ministry, and we converted a wing of our used to be our office wing for a kind of a shower and laundry center for unhoused people, and there was a lot of private and state grants that paid for a substantial portion, probably the majority of that conversion of that space, and to do it. So to get that grant, you had to have your own official status as like a 501c3 entity. If you want to get, some states are going to require you, Kentucky doesn't the same way, to be tax exempt, that you have the 501c3 form documentation. But depending on where you're at, some places.
But the Commonwealth does not require it.
Doesn't require it. But it opens you up to grants, it opens you up to other federal benefits and state benefits that are specific, that you are able to get because you have that designation. And so,
and we were talking earlier, I mean, way back earlier, we're bringing this around full circle with the sabbaticals and things like that. 501c3 status would allow you to perhaps get a grant more easily. So that's good for the minister, good for the congregation, doesn't put anyone in a financial bind kind of thing, right?
And if you have that 501c3 status too, it's like you get the discounted nonprofit mailing rates. You know, so even though
and run into money.
So it's those things that by having that official status you get. And so if you're thinking about going through that process, you know, you don't have to. It does create the additional administrative steps of your record keeping and annual filings and reports with the IRS and other organizations.
So it's a little bit upfront, but then once that's established, as long as you keep up annually what you need to do, it's not necessarily an onus every year. You don't have to recreate the wheel every year to do that. Am I right?
If you are an example, if you're a congregation that really your focus of ministry is your regular weekly worship services and maybe Sunday school, you don't run a daycare, you don't do any other outside ministries, you don't really, and that's kind of the main focus of there's probably no need that you have to go do all these extra steps, that you're not really operating these other things. But the more you get into, we're offering a child care program, we're offering
Mother's Day out, or
or you have a school, or you have all these additional steps and things that you want to be involved in, these outside reaching ministries that are really geared to the community and less to the congregation in a sense. The more of those that you get, the more you really should think about applying for 501c3.
I have noticed in my travels, because I work specifically with districts 5 and 6, a lot of the small churches right now are doing wonderfully important and immediate help in food pantries and things like that. And so to even have something in place like that, because there might be grants where you can get more food or whatever, right?
Absolutely. I think that's the one area I agree with that. I have seen so many that churches are filling that gap so wonderfully and beautifully with people who are food insecure and doing it. And it depends on your relationship with your kind of in Northern Kentucky, it's the free store food bank. And out of Cincinnati that covers that. And so that you might have to have a certain status to be able to purchase food for them at a highly discounted rate, or to be a distribution site for them, or what things that are going to be. And so it expands your opportunities to reach and tap into that bigger network of things.
Right.
And so you'll have to check with each group, have local entity, and every region has their designated big group.
Sure. Right. We haven't covered all the questions, but we have, I think, covered a lot. We've said grace over a lot. And personally, I want to thank you for doing this. This took time and effort on your part. I was able to just read things that other people gave. So, my part in it was maybe not as labor intensive, but I've been around the block a few times with in ministry, but I've learned some stuff today, and I know other congregations have. I really appreciate this.
Well, I am just pleased to be able to use my gifts that I don't think that are very useful sometimes.
I disagree. This is an important gift, and we hope it has helped you as well. And if you have any positive things, by all means, get in touch with Josh. And if you're complaining, go ahead and give it to me, and then I'll pass it on to Josh. How about we do it that way?
But I'm happy to do another round sometime if there's
I was gonna ask that, but I wasn't gonna ask that on camera. So I'm glad. So we may do this again another time. But in the meantime, thank you so much, and we will see you another time soon.